The rain had been falling for 3 hours when I finally pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Millfield Public Library. It was past 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, the kind of evening when most sensible people were home with dinner and television, wrapped in the comfortable routines that seemed to elude me lately. But I wasn't most people, and sensible had never been my strong suit. The lobby stretched before me, all polished marble and hushed reverence, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. Overhead, the old brass chandeliers cast pools of warm light that seemed to float in the gathering darkness beyond the tall windows. Rain streaked the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the streetlights outside into watercolor smears of amber and white. I stood there for a moment, water dripping from my jacket onto the floor, breathing in that particular library smell, old paper and leather bindings, the faint mustiness of age mixed with the clean scent of careful preservation. It was a smell that had always comforted me, even as a child when my mother would bring me here on Saturday mornings and I'd lose myself among the stacks for hours, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the restless 10-year-old seeking adventure in the pages of fantasy novels. I was 25, adrift in a life that felt increasingly like it belonged to someone else, walking through days that blurred together in an endless succession of meaningless tasks and hollow conversations. The job at the marketing firm paid the bills but left me feeling empty. The apartment I shared with 2 roommates was clean and functional and utterly forgettable. Even my relationships, what few there were, seemed to exist in some gray space between obligation and genuine connection. I'd been walking for an hour before I found myself here, my feet carrying me through rain-slicked streets, while my mind wandered in circles. I hadn't planned to come to the library. I hadn't planned much of anything lately, but when I saw the warm glow spilling from those tall windows, something in my chest had loosened just slightly, and I'd found myself climbing the stone steps. The main desk was empty, a brass placard reading "Back in 5 minutes," propped against the computer monitor. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:17. The library closed at 9. I had time, though for what? I couldn't say. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Maybe that was the point. I made my way deeper into the building, past the periodical section with its neat rows of magazines and newspapers, past the computer terminals where a few last stragglers tapped quietly at keyboards. My footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor, then muffled as I stepped onto the worn carpet of the fiction section. The stacks rose around me like canyon walls, shelf after shelf of stories reaching toward the coffered ceiling. Here the lighting was softer, more intimate. Individual lamps casting small circles of golden light that created islands of warmth in the vast space. I found myself drawn to one of the long wooden tables that stretched between the rows, its surface worn smooth by decades of hands and books and quiet study. I pulled out a chair and sat down, though I had nothing to read, nothing to study. The wood was solid beneath my palms, substantial in a way that felt grounding after weeks of feeling like I was floating untethered through my own life. Around me, the library breathed with its own quiet rhythm, the distant hum of ventilation, the soft whisper of someone turning a page somewhere in the poetry section, the subtle creak of old wood settling. That was when I heard the footsteps. They were quiet, deliberate, the sound of someone who knew these floors intimately. I looked up from my contemplation of the table's grain to see him emerging from between 2 towering shelves, a cart of books beside him. The librarian, though somehow that word felt inadequate for what I was seeing. He was perhaps a few years older than me, maybe 30, with dark hair that caught the lamplight and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore a simple sweater the color of coffee, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that spoke of more than just book handling. There was something unhurried about the way he moved, as if he existed in a different relationship with time than the rest of us, as if he understood that some things couldn't be rushed. He was shelving returns, sliding each book into its proper place with a kind of careful attention that suggested this was more than just a job to him. I found myself watching the efficient movements of his hands, the way he paused to straighten a row of spines, the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth when he encountered a book he particularly liked. Our eyes met across the space between the shelves, and something in my chest shifted. He didn't look away immediately, as strangers usually do. Instead, he held my gaze for a moment that stretched longer than social convention typically allowed. Then he smiled, not the polite, automatic smile of customer service, but something warmer, more genuine. You know, most people don't stay this late, he said, his voice pitched low, respectful of the library's natural hush. He moved closer, the cart's wheels rolling silently on the carpet. Maybe I just didn't want to leave yet, I replied, surprised by my own honesty. He nodded as if this made perfect sense, as if he understood something about not wanting to leave that I was only beginning to understand myself. I get that, he said. Some nights the world outside feels too much. I felt something unknot in my chest at those words. Exactly. He continued shelving, but now there was a conversation happening in the spaces between us, in the glances that lingered a heartbeat too long, in the way we both seemed to be moving more slowly, as if neither of us wanted this accidental encounter to end. I stood and wandered toward the shelves, not really looking for anything in particular, but needing to move, to do something with the restless energy that had brought me here in the first place. My fingers trailed along the spines of books, and I was acutely aware of his presence a few rows over, the soft sounds of his work creating a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. Looking for anything specific? He asked when our paths converged at the end of an aisle. Not really, I admitted, and I think I'm just looking. He understood. I could see it in his eyes, the way they softened with recognition. Sometimes that's the best kind of looking, he said. When you're not trying to find something particular, you're more likely to find something you need. We were standing closer now, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his soap, something clean and understated, close enough to notice the small scar just above his left eyebrow, the way his sweater had a tiny hole near the shoulder that had been carefully mended. "Are you?" I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the question. "Am I what?" "The only one here? Working, I mean." He glanced around the nearly empty library. "At this hour, usually. Sarah left around 7 and Tom's been gone since 6. It's just me and whoever decides to brave the night shift." Another smile, this one tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. "Though I don't usually mind the solitude, but tonight's different?" He paused, a book halfway to its shelf. "Tonight's different." We continued this strange dance, him shelving books, me pretending to browse, both of us aware of the other's presence in a way that made The enormous library feels suddenly intimate. When I reached for a book on a high shelf, something by Garcia Marquez that I'd read years ago but suddenly felt compelled to hold again, he appeared beside me. "Here," he said, reaching up easily to retrieve it. For a moment, we were standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the small flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Our shoulders nearly brushed, and neither of us moved away. "Thanks," I managed, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "You're welcome." He handed me the book, his fingers grazing mine for just an instant. The contact sent a jolt through me, unexpected and electric. "Good choice," he added, looking at the cover. Marcus understood the magic that lives in ordinary moments. I looked down at the book in my hands, then back up at him. "Do you believe in that, magic in ordinary moments?" "I work in a library," he said, and there was something almost playful in his expression. "I'm surrounded by thousands of stories every day, each one proof that extraordinary things can happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone. So yes, I believe in magic." The way he said it, looking directly at me, made me wonder if we were still talking about books. I followed him to another section, ostensibly to continue browsing, but really because I didn't want to lose this feeling, whatever this was that had settled between us like a warm current. The poetry section was even quieter than the rest of the library, tucked into an alcove with a single reading chair and a small table lamp that cast everything in golden light. "This is my favorite section," he said softly, almost as if he was sharing a secret. "Poetry?" "The whole alcove. It feels separate, like it exists in its own little pocket of the world." I understood immediately what he meant. The space felt different, more intimate, as if it had been carved out specifically for quiet revelations and whispered truths. I pulled a slim volume from the shelf at random, Pablo Neruda, and opened it to a page at random. "I love you without knowing how or when or from where," I read aloud, the words coming out barely above a whisper. "I love you simply, without problems or pride." The silence that followed was heavy with something unspoken. I could feel him watching me, could sense the weight of his attention like a physical thing. When I looked up, his eyes were darker than they'd been before, and there was something in his expression that made my breath catch. "Neruda knew something about the unexpected," he said quietly. "About how love, any kind of love, can arrive when you least expect it, in places you never thought to look." Our voices had dropped to whispers without conscious decision, as if the words we were speaking were too delicate for normal conversation. I couldn't tell if he spoke quietly because of the room with its hushed reverence and sleeping books, or because of me, because of whatever was building between us in this pocket of lamplight and leather bindings. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9, but neither of us seemed inclined to acknowledge its approach. Instead, we continued our slow circuit of the stacks, talking in low voices about books we'd loved, places we'd traveled in our imaginations, the way certain stories could remake you from the inside out. He told me about growing up in a small town where the library was the only place he felt truly himself. How he'd known from the age of 12 that he wanted to be surrounded by stories for the rest of his life. I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about: my restlessness, my sense of being disconnected from my own life, the way I'd been walking through my days feeling like I was waiting for something without knowing what. "I think," he said as we paused in the philosophy section, "that feeling is more common than people admit. This sense of waiting for your real life to begin. Is it waiting, though, or is it just not recognizing what's already here? He considered this, head tilted slightly, and I found myself studying the line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Maybe both, he said finally. Maybe we're waiting for permission to pay attention to what's been there all along. There was something in the way he said it, looking at me with those calm, knowing eyes that made me wonder if we'd moved beyond talking about life in the abstract. The air between us seemed charged with possibility, heavy with words we weren't quite ready to speak. We found ourselves in the biography section when the lights flickered, a gentle warning that closing time was approaching. The sound of the library had changed around us. The last few patrons had left, and now there was only the deep silence of a place settling into itself, the kind of quiet that felt almost alive. I started, gesturing vaguely toward the exit. Probably, he agreed, but neither of us moved. We stood there in the aisle between the lives of great writers and scientists, explorers and artists, people who had found ways to leave their mark on the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, surrounded by stories of people who had seized their moments, who had recognized the extraordinary in their ordinary lives, and we were hesitating at the edge of our own story. "I'm Alex, by the way," I said, finally offering the most basic piece of myself. "Daniel," he replied, and the name fit him perfectly, solid, classic, unpretentious. Though most people here just call me the guy who stays too late. "Is that what you are, the guy who stays too late?" "Among other things." He smiled, and there was something almost shy in it, as if he was revealing more than he usually allowed. "What about you? Are you the guy who shows up when he should probably be home?" "Tonight I am." "Just tonight?" I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the careful way he was watching me, the slight lean of his body in my direction, the way his hands rested loosely at his sides as if he was ready for whatever might happen next. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. The clock chimed 9, its deep tone echoing through the library like a gentle bell. Daniel glanced at it, then back at me and empty, and I saw something shift in his expression, a kind of reluctant acknowledgement of time and responsibility. "I should close up," he said, but he made no move to do so. "Of course. The others will be wondering why the lights are still on." "The others?" "The security guard, the cleaning crew, they'll be here soon." I nodded, understanding. The real world was reasserting itself with its schedules and obligations, its reminder that not everything could exist in the suspended time we'd created between the stacks. Slowly, reluctantly, we made our way back through the library toward the main entrance. Daniel moved with practiced efficiencies, switching off section lights, checking that computers were logged off, gathering the small detritus of a day's work. But I could see that his heart wasn't entirely in it, that some part of him was as reluctant as I was to let this evening end. At the front desk, he gathered his keys, a worn leather messenger bag, a jacket that had been draped over the back of his chair. I lingered near the circulation desk, unwilling to walk toward those glass doors and whatever waited beyond them. It wasn't just the library that felt different tonight, I found myself saying, the words coming out before I could second-guess them. It was this, meeting you, as if the silence was waiting for us. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me, and in the main lobby's brighter lights, I could see that his eyes were even darker than I thought, almost black in the overhead illumination. "I felt it too," he said quietly. We walked to the entrance together. our footsteps echoing in the marble lobby. At the doors, Daniel pulled out his keys and began the ritual of closing, switching off the remaining lights, setting the alarm, preparing to lock the building against the night. But at the last moment, he paused. His hand was on the door handle, keys ready, but instead of stepping outside, he turned back to look at the library, at the darkened stacks where we'd spent the last hour, discovering each other in careful increments, at the reading tables where other conversations had bloomed and faded, at the whole hushed cathedral of stories and possibilities. "Strange," he said, his voice thoughtful in the semi-darkness. "I don't usually mind being the last one here. I've always liked the solitude, the way the building feels when it's just mine. But tonight," he trailed off, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Tonight it felt different." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Outside, the rain had stopped, but I could still hear water dripping from the eaves, a gentle percussion against the sudden silence. I wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that I understood, that I felt it too, that walking into this library tonight had felt like walking into the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. But the words felt too large, too important for the space we'd carved out between strangers and something more. Instead, I simply nodded, letting the silence say what words couldn't. Daniel turned the key in the lock, and the heavy door sealed shut behind us with a soft click that seemed to echo in the empty street. For a moment, we stood there on the rain-wet steps, the library at our backs and the night stretching out ahead of us, both of us seemingly unwilling to take the next step that would lead us away from each other and back to our separate lives. The streetlights cast everything in amber and shadow, and I could see our reflections dimly in the dark windows, two figures poised at the edge of something caught between what was and what might be. Then Daniel shouldered his bag and started down the steps, and I knew that this moment, whatever it had been, was ending. But as he reached the sidewalk, he looked back at me one more time, and in that glance was a question that neither of us was quite ready to ask. "Good night, Alex," he said, and my name in his voice sounded like a promise. "Good night, Daniel." I watched him walk away into the pool of darkness between streetlights, his figure growing smaller until the night swallowed him completely. Only then did I start walking in the opposite direction, my footsteps loud on the wet pavement, my mind already replaying every moment of the last hour, every look, every word, every silence pregnant with possibility. Behind me, the library stood dark and patient, keeper of 1,000 stories, guardian of whatever had begun between its walls on this rain-soaked Tuesday night. And as I walked home through empty streets, I found myself thinking about tomorrow evening, wondering if the library stayed open late on Wednesdays, wondering if there were other books I needed to find, other shelves to explore, wondering if Daniel would be there, moving quietly through the stacks with that unhurried grace, ready to help me reach whatever I was looking for. The night air was cool against my face, cleaner after the rain, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was walking towards something instead of away from it. The restlessness that had driven me from my apartment earlier was still there, but it had transformed into something else, not the desperate energy of someone lost, but the quiet anticipation of someone who had just glimpsed a path forward. I didn't know where that path led, didn't know what tomorrow or next week or next month might bring, but I knew that something had shifted in those hushed aisles between biography and poetry. Something had changed in the space between one whispered conversation and another, and I knew with a certainty that surprised me that I would be back. The library was closed now, locked against the night, but already I could feel it calling me back, not just the books or the quiet or the refuge it offered from the too much world outside, but the possibility of finding him there again, of continuing whatever conversation we'd started in the spaces between the words we'd actually spoken. As I turned the corner onto my street, I could still smell the library on my clothes, that particular scent of old paper and preservation of stories waiting to be discovered. And underneath it, so faint I might have imagined it, the clean smell of Daniel's soap, the warmth that had radiated from him when we'd stood close enough to touch. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would find a reason to visit the library again. Tomorrow I would see if whatever had sparked between us in the poetry alcove could survive the bright light of day, if the magic that Marcus wrote about really could live in ordinary moments, in the simple act of two people discovering they might not want to be strangers. Tonight felt like the end of something, the end of wandering aimlessly through my own life, the end of feeling disconnected from my own story. But it also felt like a beginning, like the first page of a book I was finally ready to read. And somewhere across town, I hoped that Daniel was thinking the same thing, that he was lying in his own bed replaying our conversation, remembering the way the silence had felt charged with possibility, wondering what might happen if we let ourselves find out what came next. The rain started again as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Gentle drops against the windows, and I fell asleep to the sound of it, dreaming of libraries and whispered conversations, of hands that nearly touched reaching for the same book, of a man with calm eyes who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. And in my dreams it was always tomorrow evening, and the library was always open, and Daniel was always there, shelving books with that careful attention, looking up when I walked in as if he'd been waiting for me to arrive, as if he'd known somehow that I would always come back. Part 2. The next morning came gray and persistent, the kind of overcast Wednesday that makes the whole world feel muffled and soft around the edges. I went through the motions of my regular routine: shower, coffee, the mechanical process of getting dressed for another day at the marketing firm, but underneath it all was a current of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. Every few minutes, I found my thoughts drifting back to the library, to those quiet moments between the stacks when conversation had felt like discovery. Daniel's voice echoing in the hushed space, the way his eyes had held mine when he talked about magic living in ordinary moments, the careful distance we'd maintained that had somehow felt more intimate than touching. At work, I moved through meetings and phone calls with only half my attention, the other half replaying every word we'd exchanged, every pause heavy with unspoken possibility. My colleagues probably thought I was distracted, which I was, but for the first time in months, it wasn't the vacant distraction of someone going through the motions. It was the focused distraction of someone with somewhere to be. By 5 o'clock, I had made my decision. I left the office earlier than usual, claiming a doctor's appointment that didn't exist, and found myself walking the familiar streets toward the library with purposeful steps. The afternoon light was fading early, autumn asserting itself in the shortened days and the way the air carried hints of wood smoke and dying leaves. This time, when I pushed through the glass doors, it was barely 6:30. The library was still busy with the after-work crowd, people checking out books for the evening, students claiming tables for homework, the comfortable bustle of a community space in full swing. I felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that my return so soon might seem obvious, transparent, but I needn't have worried about subtlety. The moment I stepped into the main hall, I saw him. Daniel was at the circulation desk, helping an elderly woman find a large print mystery novel, his attention focused entirely on her needs. But as if he sensed my presence, he looked up, and our eyes met across the busy space. The smile that spread across his face was immediate and genuine, transforming his whole expression in a way that made my chest tighten with something I wasn't ready to name. He finished with the woman, Mrs. Patterson, I heard him call her, and made his way around the desk toward me. He moved with that same unhurried grace I'd noticed the night before, but now there was something else in his step, a kind of quiet gladness that he didn't try to hide. "Back so soon?" he asked when he reached me, his voice warm with what might have been amusement. "Maybe I didn't finish what I came for," I replied, echoing the rhythm of our conversation from the night before. He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, as if people routinely returned to libraries 22 hours after leaving them because they hadn't quite finished some unnamed business. "What section calls to you today?" I realized I hadn't thought that far ahead. Last night had been about wandering, about letting the library guide me where it would. Today I had been focused entirely on seeing him again, on finding out if the connection we'd discovered would survive in daylight in the busy context of normal library hours. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "That's the best way to start," he said. "Let me know if you need help finding anything. I'll be around." He returned to his work, and I began my own careful exploration of the stacks, hyper-aware of his presence even when he was out of sight. The library felt different in the early evening bustle, more public, less intimate, but underneath the surface activity I could sense the same quiet reverence that had surrounded us the night before. I found myself in the history section, not because I was particularly drawn to history, but because it offered a good vantage point of the circulation desk. I pulled a book about the Civil War from the shelf, something heavy and authoritative that I had no real intention of reading, and settled into a nearby chair. From there I could watch Daniel work. I saw how he greeted each patron with genuine attention, how he seemed to remember the reading preferences of regular visitors, the way he handled books with a kind of reverent care. There was something deeply attractive about competence, I realized, about watching someone do work they clearly loved with skill and dedication. The library began to empty as the evening progressed. Families with children left first, then the business people who had stopped in on their way home, then the casual browsers who had come in to kill an hour. By 7:30, the space had returned to something approaching the hushed intimacy I remembered from the night before. Daniel appeared at my elbow so quietly I didn't notice him until he spoke. "How's the reading going?" he asked, nodding toward the Civil War tome that had been opened to the same page for the last hour. I looked down at the book as if surprised to find it there. "Fascinating," I said. "Really compelling stuff about the war." He laughed, a soft sound that seemed to wrap around me like warmth. "The war. Very specific." "I'm a details person. I can see that." He pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down, close enough that I could smell that clean scent I remembered from the night before. "You know, If you wanted to spend time in the library, you didn't need to pretend to read about military strategy. The directness of it caught me off guard. I closed the book and set it aside, meeting his eyes. Was I that obvious? Only to someone who was hoping you'd come back. The admission hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable in a way that made my breath catch. In the daylight, well, the fluorescent library light, he looked younger somehow, less mysterious, but no less compelling. There were small lines around his eyes that spoke of smiling, a tiny freckle just below his left ear that I hadn't noticed in the lamplight the night before. I couldn't stop thinking about last night, I found myself saying, about our conversation, about this place. Just the place? I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the careful way he was watching me, the slight lean of his body toward mine, the question in his eyes that he wasn't quite asking directly. Not just the place, I said quietly. We sat there for a moment, the weight of mutual recognition settling around us. The library continued its evening rhythm around us. The soft sounds of pages turning, the distant hum of computers, the occasional footstep on carpet. But it all felt distant, as if we existed in our own pocket of space and time. I get off at 9, Daniel said eventually. If you wanted to, if you didn't have anywhere else to be. I don't, I said quickly. Have anywhere else to be. He smiled, and something in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. Then stay, if you want to. We can talk about books, or wars, or whatever people talk about when they're trying to figure out if they like each other. Do we need to figure that out? Maybe not, he said. Maybe some things are obvious from the start. The next 2 hours passed like minutes and years simultaneously. I moved through the library with him as he completed his evening tasks, ostensibly browsing but really just wanting to be near him to continue the conversation we'd started in fragments the night before. We talked about everything and nothing, books we'd loved as children, places we'd traveled, the particular magic of libraries at closing time. But underneath the surface conversation was another dialogue entirely, conducted in glances and silences, in the way we both found reasons to linger near each other, in the careful space we maintained that seemed to hum with possibility. As 9 o'clock approached and the last patrons filtered out, the library settled into that familiar hush I was beginning to associate with anticipation. Daniel moved through his closing routine with practiced efficiency, but I noticed he moved more slowly than he had the night before, as if he too was reluctant for the evening to end. You know, he said as we stood near the poetry alcove where we'd shared that moment with Neruda the night before, most people rush through here. They know what they want, they find it, they leave. But you stay, like you belong in the quiet. There was something in his voice that made me look at him more closely. In the soft glow of the section lamp, his expression was thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Maybe I do belong in the quiet, I said. I never knew that about myself before. What did you think you knew about yourself? It was such an unexpected question, so gently profound that it caught me completely off guard. I stood there among the poetry books, this man I barely knew but somehow trusted watching me with those calm, patient eyes, and found myself being more honest than I'd been with anyone in months. I thought I was someone who needed to be moving all the time, I said slowly. Someone who couldn't sit still, couldn't be content with stillness. I thought the restlessness was who I was. And now Now I think maybe I was just moving because I hadn't found anywhere worth staying. The words surprised me as I said them, but they felt true in a way that few things in my life had felt true lately. Daniel nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "I've worked here for 3 years," he said quietly, "and I've never minded the solitude. I've never wanted company during closing time. I've always thought of the library after hours as my own private space, my sanctuary." "And now?" I asked, echoing his question back to him. "Now I keep hoping someone specific will still be here when I turn around." We were standing closer than we had been, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough that if either of us had reached out, we could have touched, but we didn't. We maintained that careful distance that had become part of our dance, part of the slow discovery we were making of each other. The clock chimed 9, its deep tone rolling through the quiet library like a gentle warning. Daniel glanced toward the sound, then back at me, and I saw something shift in his expression, the same reluctant acknowledgement of time and responsibility I'd seen the night before. But this time was different. This time, neither of us pretended we were ready for it to end. We made our way toward the front of the library together, Daniel gathering his things with the same careful attention he brought to everything. But I could sense his reluctance in the way he moved, the way his hands lingered on each task. At the circulation desk, he picked up his keys and stopped, looking at them as if they held some answer to a question he wasn't ready to ask. "I don't want to lock up yet," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Then don't." He raised his eyes to mine, and in them I saw the same mixture of uncertainty and longing that I felt in my own chest. "The security guard won't come until 10, and the cleaning crew, they can wait." It wasn't really a question, but I answered it anyway. "Then let's not go yet." We stood there for a moment, the decision hanging between us like a bridge we were both afraid to cross. Then Daniel set his keys back down on the desk and smiled. Not the polite, professional smile of a librarian helping a patron, but something warmer, more personal, more real. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He led me deeper into the library than I'd been before, past the main stacks and reading areas, through a door marked "Staff Only" that opened onto a narrow staircase. We climbed to the second floor, which I realized I'd never explored, and emerged into a smaller, more intimate space lined with rare books and special collections. But it wasn't the books that took my breath away, it was the windows. The entire north wall was glass, tall windows that looked out over the town's small downtown, over the tops of trees and the glimmer of streetlights just beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk. And against those windows, rain was beginning to fall again, gentle at first but growing steadier, turning the view into an impressionist painting of light and shadow. "This is the reference room," Daniel said softly. "It's usually closed to the public after 7, but..." He shrugged, as if breaking minor rules was a new experience for him. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, its surface polished to a deep gleam by decades of use. A single banker's lamp cast a pool of warm light across its surface, and the rest of the room fell away into gentle shadows. It felt like a secret space, a hidden sanctuary within the larger sanctuary of the library. We sat down across from each other at the table, the lamp creating an island of intimacy in the darkening room. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the tall windows in a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. "How long have you been coming to libraries?" Daniel asked, his voice soft enough that it wouldn't have carried beyond our small circle of light. "Since I was a kid," I said. "My mom used to bring me on Saturday mornings. I'd spend hours in the children's section reading everything I could get my hands on." "What changed?" "I don't know. Life, I guess, school, work, the feeling that I should be doing more important things than sitting in libraries reading stories. And now," I looked around the quiet room, at the rain streaming down the windows, at Daniel sitting across from me in the lamplight, his expression patient and interested and completely focused on me. "Now I think maybe this is the most important thing I could be doing." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I became a librarian because I believe in the power of quiet spaces, in the idea that people need places to think, to discover, to just be. But I never thought about how lonely it could be, being the guardian of all that quiet." "Are you lonely?" He considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. "I was. I didn't realize how much until yesterday night, when you walked in and I realized I'd been waiting for someone to share it with." The rain drummed harder against the windows, turning the world outside into a blur of light and shadow. In our small circle of lamplight, the silence stretched between us. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, heavy with all the things we weren't quite ready to say. "I keep thinking about that Neruda poem," I said eventually. "The one I read last night. 'I love you simply without problems or pride,'" Daniel quoted softly. "Do you think he was right? That love can be simple." Daniel was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I think some things feel complicated because we expect them to be, because we're told should be. But maybe the truest things are actually simple. Maybe they're just hard to recognize because we're looking for something more dramatic." I looked at him across the table, this man I'd known for less than 24 hours who somehow felt like someone I'd been searching for without knowing it. The lamplight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the thoughtful curve of his mouth, the gentle intelligence in his eyes. "What if," I said carefully, "what if someone told you they thought they were falling for someone they'd just met? Someone they'd spent exactly 2 evenings with, most of it in whispered conversations in a library?" "I'd say," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the flush that had risen in his cheeks, "that libraries are places where extraordinary things happen, where people discover stories they didn't know they needed, where the impossible becomes possible between the covers of books. And if that someone said they'd never felt anything this strong this quickly before." "I'd say that some stories don't need long introductions. Some characters know each other from the first page." The rain against the windows had become a steady drumming, and the world beyond our small circle of light had disappeared entirely. We could have been anywhere. In a cottage in the mountains, on a ship in the middle of the ocean, in a cabin at the edge of the world. But we were here in this quiet room full of stories, discovering our own. "Daniel," I said, and his name felt different in my mouth now, more substantial, more real. "Alex." The way he said my name made something flutter in my chest. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know the rules for whatever this is. Maybe there aren't any rules. Maybe we just see what happens." I reached across the table, slowly giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he met me halfway, his fingers intertwining with mine on the polished wood surface. His hand was warm, slightly rough from handling books, and the contact sent a shock of electricity through me that had nothing to do with static and everything to do with connection. "Is this okay?" I asked. "More than okay," he whispered. We sat there holding hands across the table, the rain painting silver streaks down the windows around us, the lamp casting our joint shadows on the wall. It was such a simple touch, fingers interlaced, palms pressed together, but it felt monumental. It felt like crossing a bridge from one version of myself to another. "I keep thinking," Daniel said softly, "that I should be scared. That this is happening too fast, that I don't know you well enough to feel this way." "But you're not scared." "I'm terrified," he admitted with a laugh that was half wonder, half amazement. "But not of this, not of you. I'm scared that I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. That I'll come to work tomorrow and you won't come back." "I'll come back," I said, and I meant it with a certainty that surprised me. "I'll keep coming back. Promise?" "Promise." The clock somewhere in the building chimed the half hour, and we both glanced toward the sound. 9:30, the security guard would be arriving soon, and the cleaning crew and the regular world would reassert itself around us. But for these few minutes more, we had this: the rain and the lamplight and the quiet room full of stories, the feeling of fingers intertwined and possibilities spreading out before us like an uncharted map. "We should probably go," Daniel said, but he made no move to let go of my hand. "Probably," I agreed, not moving either. "People will wonder why the lights are still on." "Let them wonder." He laughed, a sound full of delight and disbelief. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you? The best kind, I hope." We sat there for a few more minutes, neither of us willing to be the first to break the spell. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, and the world beyond felt very far away. In this room, at this table, holding hands in the circle of light from a banker's lamp, we were writing the opening chapter of something that felt bigger than either of us alone. Finally, reluctantly, Daniel squeezed my fingers and let go. "I really do have to lock up now," he said with genuine regret. "I know." But as we stood and prepared to leave our small sanctuary, I knew that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just another evening that would end with polite goodnights and separate directions. This was the beginning of something that would continue tomorrow and the day after that, and for as long as we were brave enough to let it grow. We made our way back downstairs to the main floor, Daniel turning off lights as we went, but neither of us hurried. At the front entrance he gathered his keys and jacket, but this time there was no hesitation, no reluctant acknowledgement of duty. This time we both knew that leaving the library didn't mean leaving each other. "So," I said, as he locked the door behind us, "same time tomorrow?" He turned to look at me, rain misting around us under the entrance awning, and his smile was radiant even in the dim light of the street lamps. "I'll be here," he said. I'm always here." "Good," I said, "because I think I'm gonna need a lot more help finding what I'm looking for." "What are you looking for?" I looked at him, standing there in the rain-soft light. This man who had appeared in my life like an answered prayer I hadn't known I was making, and felt that certainty settle deeper in my chest. "You," I said simply. "I was looking for you." We walked in the same direction this time, toward the downtown area where both our apartments happened to be. The rain was gentle now, more mist than drops, and our footsteps echoed softly on the wet pavement. We talked in quiet voices about small things, the weather, weekend plans, favorite places in town, but underneath the ordinary conversation was the extraordinary fact of walking together, of not having to say goodbye quite yet. At the corner where our paths would diverge, we stopped. The streetlight cast everything in amber and shadow, and I could see my own wonder reflected in Daniel's eyes. "Thank you," I said, "for tonight, for showing me the reference room, for all of it. Thank you for staying, for coming back, for—" He paused, searching for words. "For making me realize that the quiet doesn't have to be empty." We stood there for a moment longer, reluctant to break the spell, reluctant to walk away from each other, even though we both knew we'd see each other again in less than 24 hours. Then Daniel stepped closer and very gently, very carefully pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It was chaste, sweet, barely more than a whisper of contact, but it sent warmth flooding through me that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with tenderness, with promise, with the careful beginning of something precious. "Good night, Alex," he said, his voice soft, enough to be a secret. "Good night, Daniel." I watched him walk away into the gentle rain until he disappeared around the corner, then stood there for another minute just breathing in the night air that still seemed to hold the echo of his presence. When I finally started walking toward my own apartment, I realized I was smiling, not the polite, automatic smile of social interaction, but something deeper, truer, more real. It wasn't the books or the quiet that kept me coming back to the library, I realized as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. It was him, always him, the way he moved through the stacks with such careful attention, the way he spoke about stories as if they were living things, the way he looked at me as if I were a book he wanted to read slowly, savoring every page. Tonight had felt like a promise, like the first chapter of a story that would take time to unfold but was already worth whatever patience it required. And as I fell asleep to the sound of rain against my windows, I was already planning tomorrow evening, already imagining the moment when I would walk through those glass doors and see him look up from whatever he was doing and smile, as if he had been waiting all day for me to arrive, as if he had known from that very first night when we were the only two people left in the hushed cathedral of stories and possibility, that this was how it would be, that some connections transcend time and logic, that some stories begin not with dramatic gestures but with whispered conversations in quiet rooms, with hands that almost touch reaching for the same book, with the simple recognition that two people might not want to be alone anymore. The rain drummed gently against my windows as I drifted toward sleep, and in my dreams we were always sitting at that table in the reference room, lamplight pooling around us, fingers intertwined, the world outside blurred by rain and irrelevant to the perfect, quiet universe we had created between us. And in my dreams, we never had to say goodbye, Kim.